We're live.
Yes.
Oh, Marcel, I think I can still hear you, by the way. All right, I think we're good. You want to kick us off, Aaron?
Hey, hi, everyone. Much for your time today. My name is Erin Codd, Labs Director at Tenzu Labs, where we help build incredible software teams by delivering working product together. And I have the privilege of moderating today's panel, which we hope is going to be a spirited, very candid, info-packed session about all things AI and how you can use it to build better customer experiences fast. So I will turn it over for introductions to the three of you. Tony, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'll go first. Hey everyone, I'm Tony McCulley. Been at VMware for, I guess, going on 2 years now. Prior to that, I spent 9 years at probably the biggest home improvement retailer. So I guess my company thinks that means I know something about retail. So yeah, I'm here happy to chat and have an open conversation with two of my colleagues. And yeah, I'll kick it over to Sergio.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Sergio Rio. I'm an executive advisor with VMware Tanzu. Like Tony, I've been with the company for 2 years. And what we do is just to briefly to mention that we partner with our strategic customers in their digital transformation initiatives. In my past life, I had the privilege to serve industry-leading food manufacturers, food distribution companies, and also food retailers. So I look forward to a very exciting and a richful conversation here with you today. I'll turn it to Bernard.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bernard Golden, and I am a member of the Tanzu Value Advisory team. And I don't know that either Tony or Sergio really described that, but we work with VMware's very largest customers to help them in their digital transformations, their cloud migrations, their app modernization, whatever phrase you want to use about moving to sort of cloud native practices. And really that we see that across every industry. My background, I live in Silicon Valley. I've worked in the software industry my entire career. Been involved with cloud computing, which is a real driver for this kind of transformation since before it was called cloud computing since 2008. So, over the course of time, I've worked at a couple of startups that helped enterprises with cloud computing, how to adopt cloud computing more effectively. And I also served as Vice President of Cloud Strategy at Capital One, so worked in a very large end user, making a big transformation. Capital One is a financial services institution, not a retailer, although they do have very nice cafes. I don't know if anybody has ever gone to one of their cafes, but it's very nice, and they're very nice. And but they're well known because they've gone all in on public cloud. Capital One runs all of its systems in AWS, so well known for that. I served as Vice President of Cloud Strategy for there. So that sort of gives a little bit of background about myself, but also gives you a sense of kind of what all three of us have focused on, what we work on day to day within our work here at VMware.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Let's start with a big question. What do you all see as the biggest challenges facing leaders in this space today? And what opportunities do you think exist for retail leaders specifically that might be different from other industries?
I'll take a stab first. So I think, again, don't have a lot of statistics or market research around some of this. I'm just basing this on, my day-to-day conversations with lots of customers in this space. Obviously with COVID, I would say, and then Bernard can correct me if I'm wrong here, I would say there was a little bit of a reprioritization, and even enhanced prioritization of cloud and cloud adoption, right? Whether that's, e-com, fulfillment, and so forth. A lot of companies were already investing in cloud, but COVID really accelerated that. I think the downside to that, though, based on a lot of conversations I've had, is that customers sort of deprioritize their investments in their brick and mortar, right, in-person stuff. And then coming out of COVID, customer behaviors changed very rapidly. And so now, we've seen a big sort of resurgence to in-store. I mean, online will be forever changed, but there is a resurgence back to in-store. And so I think a lot of companies are now thinking like, okay, like what's next for us, right? Like, we've kind of been kicking this in-store or in-person can down the road. Like, what do we do now? So I know that's a big concern. And then at the same time, though, huge advancements, right? With everyone's all the talk is a buzz about Chat GTP or GPT, and what does that mean, and AI, and so forth. So there's a lot going on. And I think a lot of retail leaders are sort of saying like, "Hey, like, what's next for us?" So I think there's a lot of stuff to figure out there.
What do you think is next, Tony? After the omni-channel experience, after these kind of changing customer behaviors, what do you think is next and why?
I don't know, Sergey, do you want to chime in, or I'm happy to keep talking, but I want to give it.
Yeah, no, I would just add in terms of the challenges, right? There are two usual challenges in this industry. One is cost increases, particularly in the past, let's say 12, 18 months with the labor costs. We have been historically very low under unemployment rates, and wages have been growing. So this is one constant in the retail industry. The other one is associated with that is the supply chain instabilities, right? So for different reasons, geopolitical reasons, economic reasons, strategic. So which just takes us to the point of automation or to drive efficiencies to reduce costs. And one of the recent breakthroughs in Gen AI that's been a hype has been how can retailers can use Gen AI or large language models to drive efficiency, right? How to drive smart or intelligent automations, improve customer service, but also two things I think are opportunities. Now taking you back to your question, Aaron, which is one is not only how to use these new technologies to reduce costs at the edge, because the point of sale, the stores are back to the center of the retail operations or the customer experience. And second is how using it at the edge, obviously, and how these technologies can also help retailers to capture the customer intent, to know better their customers. These predictive models or generative models, what they do is they try to predict. Those are statistical models to predict the customer intent, and to do that, data is of a critical. It's critical. The quality and availability of data is critical to that. So two additional challenges, or the same challenges, traditional challenges, and also they also bring opportunities for the retailers as well, Larry.
Aaron, if I may chime in, I think your question was a really good one, which is sort of where do things stand for retailers, what's changed, and what's coming down the pike. And what I would say is, sort of from a larger perspective, what retailers have been experiencing is it's sort of their turn, and has been for a few years, definitely, but it's sort of really biting into them, the whole migration to digitization in our society and our economy. And there are other industries that got hit a lot earlier. So anything that was just inherently digital, so newspapers, music, etc. We've seen those industries dramatically transformed, and it's sort of moved into retail. There's been a strong trend toward e-commerce for a long time. I would attribute a lot of this to kind of the relentlessness of Amazon, that has been going after retail in many different dimensions for a long time. But that sort of digital kind of approach is really moving into the mainstream of our site. So that's going on for retailers. This is a huge way that people want to interact with retailers. By the same token, though, their retailing is not an inherently digital business, right? They have to deliver atoms. You want, a box of Q-tips, or you want a table, or whatever it is you want. It's a physical good, and that has to somehow get to you. And that's a challenge because they're always going to have a physical location. Many of them, and certainly the ones that have been established for a long time. But they still have to incorporate the digital capabilities, because people go, I want to go learn about it, or I want to go look at it, or I want to do comparison shopping. So they've got to figure out a way to, how do they integrate those kinds of things? Because the old model of some people buy here and some people buy there, that's going to be increasingly less common. People are going to say, I want something that melds those two capabilities. And if I show up on a physical location, I want you to already know what I'm interested in or what I've done. And if I show up online, I want you to be able to deal with the stuff I've had physically. And I think that's a big challenge that retailers have to think about. How do I treat a customer as a single thing? Thing is a bad term. A single person, and yet have that sort of 360 view of them from all the different ways they want to interact with me. And, and that's, by the way, that's not just with a website, from a web browser, that's also from their phone or their watch or whatever the heck it is. So it's sort of a multifaceted thing. So, they're experiencing it's their time in the increasing digitization of things going on, but they have a unique challenge because they're always going to have to mix physical and virtual, and customers kind of, have very high expectations of what they want from that mix.
So what you're kind of talking about is a real unified customer experience, right? And the shift from disparate systems and different data and things like that to the customer being the kind of single unit that you're focusing on, with all different types of things supporting them on that journey. I'm really curious, with the advancements in AI and things like this, what role does that play in the transition from first brick and mortar, then to online, and now to this kind of more unified customer experience?
Yeah, so I think I think Sergio definitely knows a lot more about the AI ML space than I do. However, what I would say is, I think Bernard nailed it, right? So like Amazon really has shaped customer expectations, behaviors in terms of like digitization of sort of retail, right? But we see this in the hospitality industry as well, like post-COVID, right? Like there's been a lot of pent up sort of pressure, right? So I think what you're seeing is a lot of people kind of going back into stores, but with those reshaped behaviors and expectations, right? And so, this notion of, what used to be omnichannel, right, where you would sort of order online and then sort of, head to your local store and then pick it up right in person, like that used to be good enough, right? But now with the, reshaped expectations coupled with advancements in technology, I think retailers are starting to look towards and doing what that new thing is, or unified retail experience, right? But yeah, so I think I don't know as much about that topic. I mean, Sergio, do you want to talk a little bit about sort of? I'll pull up some graphics while we do this, but I think there are some interesting sort of like edge technologies, right, coupled with AI and so forth. And I'll pull up those graphics while you're talking through that, Sergio.
Yeah, the unified experience is just to illustrate what we're talking about, right? It's that, as Bernard also touched a little bit on. Is that a contextualized experience, right, from the consumer's perspective? It doesn't matter if I am checking the website using my cell phone, my computer, I'll be interested in checking products, or if I visit the store and I immediately the app detects that I am present and helps me, directing me to the right store location where I can find the products, or offer me some last minute promotions or discounts. Or if I decide to order it on site and I want it to be delivered, and I go back home and I change my mind. So all of that contextual information is critical to provide. Yeah, so the context data is critical to provide that kind of experience. Which takes us to one, pretty much technology challenge, which is how do I gather this data? How do I make this data, it is timely so that I can use it? It's usable. Having information from last week, past month doesn't help much. It helps in terms of trends, right? Historical trends, but doesn't help me as a retailer to get the sale right done when the customer is considering me as a potential candidate. So this context data in this unified experience that we're talking about is critical. From a technology standpoint, the question becomes, what kind of database, systems, infrastructure, business intelligence that I need to enable this capability of capture the context data on a timely. So, and those are the trade-offs that usually an IT organization, retail business has to deal with. Ideally, you should have everything on the cloud, right? For cost perspectives, to reduce the support and maintenance costs as well. But that's not the case if you're driving some innovative use cases at the edge, right? So that you're detecting a customer presence in the store. If you want to know what the customer is doing in that store, there are many, many examples. I think we have one good slide about it somewhere. The question is, how much infrastructure do I need on site at the edge, and how much do I need on the cloud, right? And what are the associated costs, and what are the return over the investment, right? So those are the technology challenges presented by this unified experience. Gathering data, right, on a timely basis to be pervasive, so it doesn't matter where the customer is, and what are the technologies that you need to do that, and the trade-offs, what centralized versus distributed, edge versus cloud. Right? So those are, I would say, the challenges that the industry is dealing with as we speak.
What we seem to be talking about is a real a fundamental shift in how we're thinking about customer data and how we use that to build incredible experiences. And it's a pretty big change. And I would imagine that some of this change takes time. If you're in the shoes of other leaders, how do you get started fast? What are some pragmatic steps that you recommend thinking about today, tomorrow, to get started on this big transition?
Well, that's Tony or Bernard to comment on how to start it.
Tony, why don't you talk a little bit about kind of your experience at your former employer, and then let me follow on with kind of what I observed from my time at Capital One, because when it started, it was all on-prem data centers and eventually ended up there. So I can talk about kind of the overall journey.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, having compute at the edge is important, and I would say in today, at a minimum, being able to run containers at the edge, right? So, there was a lot of stuff that used to be a lot of DIY at the edge. I think today we're seeing much more like proliferation of COTS or vendor to offer solutions that come packaged as containers, obviously. But then in addition to that, the edge, right? I think Sergio can probably speak more about this, right? But you have other concerns too, right? So you have IoT. We're even seeing like GPUs now in the edge, right? For like, image, processing and so forth. So I would say at a minimum, right? Like, having a little bit of a modern platform at the edge is like a really good place to start. But that being said, that comes with like its whole own suite of challenges, right? So as you can imagine, for anyone that's done, software even in the cloud or on-prem, you have versioning, deployment challenges, right? Pipelines and so forth, right? Security. That gets exasperated, in my opinion, right? And from talking to customers, like when you're at the edge, like not only are all of these 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 locations like physically different, and there's versioning and challenges there. But then you can imagine the software supporting those versions of hardware, right? And then as you do rollouts, so taking your software, being able to version it, right, knowing which version is running in which store or location, and then tracking the differences in each store as well. Like, so that whole pipeline is like a challenge within itself. So you definitely need some tooling or some sort of process controls around ensuring you have a very standardized, secure, reliable, repeatable way to like build software and get it deployed at the edge. So I would say at a minimum, you're looking at containers at the edge, and then a really good CI/CD / deployment solution and versioning solution as well. I think Sergio probably talked a little bit about some of the data, but that is everyone's been talking in retail about master data for a long time, but like, it's definitely a topic Sergio knows more about. But I would say what I keep hearing folks at companies say is like, all right, we have to do master data, but for real this time. And so I hear that quite a bit. But I would say at a minimum, for me, just to reiterate, like containers at the edge, and then being able to support, IoT, GPU, that sort of thing, and then a good pipeline to get stuff there and track versioning.
Awesome. Go on, Bernard.
Yeah, it's interesting. Capital One, I believe, really started. So first, they made a strategic decision. They wanted to go to cloud computing because they recognized they do a big strategy exercise every year because the company is still run by a founder who has a background in strategy consulting. So that's the way they think. So every year they make an assessment. What's going on with our company? What's going on in the industry? What's going on with customer expectations, etc. And at one point they said, for us to be a financial services company in the future, we need to be a tech company. So they sort of set that out. That's our North Star. And then they said, well, what do we need to do that? And interestingly, where they started was really around their software development process. They shifted to Agile. So they were still on-prem. They still had their own kinds of environments. But I believe their strategy was kind of, let's create pressure to be able to roll stuff out more quickly. Because if you're still rolling stuff out, once every 6 months, it's hard to go, yeah, we really need Agile infrastructure. But once they did that, they started to go, okay, now we need something that can absorb those changes, not challenges. Although there were plenty of challenges, those changes. So in other words, if we're going to be rolling out new releases every 6 weeks, how can we deal with that? So then they started to look at their deployment pipeline, and that talks about the CI/CD pipeline that Tony was just mentioning. And they did that. And then eventually they said, well, what's the right environment for us to be able to get the kind of capabilities that we now have? Lots of releases. We can roll them out quickly. We're ready to deploy them. We need an environment that can absorb those deployments. They said, okay, that's going to be public cloud. And so that was the kind of the cadence and the place that they went for that. But overarching all of that, or underlying it as the foundation, was the commitment that that was what they were going to do. It wasn't we're going to experiment, we'll see how it goes. What I've encountered, I'm not speaking about my time here at VMware, but what I've seen a lot of in the industry over this time I've been with cloud computing is you'll have a leader come in and say, we're going to do X, we're going to move to Azure, we're going to do whatever it might be. And you get a lot of what I'd call passive aggressive behavior. People going, yeah, I'm just going to wait this out. And, and that person's there for a couple of years or whatever, then transfers out or takes another job or whatever it is. And it's kind of like, okay, now we can go back. With the kind of approach that I just outlined about Capital One, it wasn't like you could do that. I mean, the founder was running the company, there wasn't going to be a change of mind or a change in whatever. So I think that that's something that's very important for organizations, is they have to kind of say, this is our North Star. That's not going to change. And you have to sort of use that as a constant kind of a, I don't know what, motivation, and, bake it into your measurements and incentives and so forth and so on. But underlying those changes, so it was Agile, deployment processes, CI/CD, and then location, underlying it with a commitment to, we need to be a tech company.
If I may, I want to I piggyback on something Bernard just said, because I think it reminded me of something. For a lot of companies we talk to, they're talking about transformation of some sort, whether that's agile, digital, cloud, whatever, right? I would say, today, for cutting edge retailers, or retailers looking to create that next thing, that unified experience, in some ways, and I'd be curious, Bernard, Sergio, call me crazy here, but all of those things that Bernard just mentioned are sort of like table stakes now. So if you can imagine, right, trying to build this unified experience with these complex data problems and interconnected systems and context, right? I think we're still just in the process of figuring out what that looks like. And so there's a huge amount of experimentation that's needed with that, and sort of exploring and kind of going back to being all right, what are our customers, going back to this customer-centric view of the world and being very product-oriented, and, the whole MVP and all that stuff. Imagine that times 10, right? So all of those things that Bernard just said, if you're still in that position where you're looking at, we got to fix this, we got to be more agile, we got to be more lean, we need automation, those things are all table stakes. If you don't have those things in order, I think it's going to be difficult to kind of keep up with the companies that are really paving the way on what this new unified experience looks like.
So
Yeah.
I've been joined by my co-presenter, Star. Don't be surprised if you hear some purring. She's quite loud too. So
Sergio, go on. I think that you were about to say something.
No, I'll just say that Tony is right. There are a couple of things that are critical to the success of these companies, right? So if you're still arguing about if you should use cloud or don't use cloud, the time is gone. How are we going to use it? What kind of mix of hybrid is the best for you? Well, that's a valid discussion. Waterfall or long delivery, cycles for your apps, features, capabilities. If you're still struggling with that, well, that's hard, right? That's problem number one, or priority number one for you to address, is not only as a technology but also as a business in general. So those things, I agree with Tony, those table stakes, right? And so if you in the process of experimenting, so how do you start, right? Assuming that you have at least the foundations, the basics, or if you don't, go for it immediately. But then when you can, for example, start extending your pipelines or application development pipelines to the edge, for example, so you can quickly try, test new ideas and pivot fast if they don't work, or spread them, as fast as you can, because there's really, real payback on them. So you need, there's some foundational critical decisions that you need to make as a company, who you are, what you're doing. As Bernard mentioned, is Capital One, what is non-negotiable for you as a business. Focus on the core capabilities. Your technology stack, your organization, and your ways of working. How are you going to manage or test these opportunities? So if I could, or try to summarize, wrap up your ideas on how to start, is there are some core capabilities, critical decisions, and once you have them, there's no recipe or one solution, one size fits all for all the retail businesses, right? Food retail is completely different in nature because of the nature of their products in operations in comparison with clothing, apparel, or other businesses. That's when you need to start, testing your hypothesis and as fast as you can, and learn from that and improve from that. But it's not easy. It is a challenging environment because you're always, under pressure of keeping your costs under control, right? How much infrastructure you can afford to have on site, because it's not only the capital or the expenses associated with it, but it's the total cost of ownership, the support, its maintenance, its field support, right? And that's when technology, associated with those challenges, that's when technologies like containerized apps can help you to do that. You can optimize your hardware utilization. You can, for example, GPUs these days, it is quite challenging to get a GPU, and if you get one or a certain number of GPUs, how do you optimize or share them across your use cases on the shop floor, on your store? So containerized apps, application platforms to extend your application pipelines, have a secure software supply chain. Those are the technologies that come hand in hand with all of those, I would say, organizational and cultural changes, right, that a company requires to explore these opportunities these days, Aaron.
Absolutely. So it seems like, a clear North Star, a commitment to agility, a culture of experimentation, and some amazing technology that can help you go fast are all going to help you capitalize on this evolution that we find ourselves in right now. What I'm curious about is, let's say that you're in a place where you can move really, really quickly. As a leader, how do you ensure then that what your teams are building are the right things for your customers? And what role does things like AI and ML play in that space?
I can touch on part of it. I think it goes back to a little bit of what I sort of hinted at earlier, but being customer centric, product driven, data driven, right? Like, these are all things that we keep saying, kind of throwing around, but I think even more so with trying to fit this particular problem in particular, right? Like, the new unified customer experience in a store, if I look today, I think most companies are probably say, I don't know if anyone's really figured out what that is, right? But there's so many new things that are our disposal to sort of start kind of cobbling together to take a crack at that. And so I think it goes back to being very good being this, continuous learning, right? As a culture. I mean, Bernard touched upon it too, and it's funny, we haven't talked about this before, but there are some similarities. I think the companies, I know for mine, right? The company that I was at previously, like our core values were so important and ingrained, right? Like we knew what our North Stars were, and those things outlast any leader or executive, right? Like, and again, technology and vendors and partners kind of come and go, or the implementation of a technology kind of comes and goes. But like as a company, do you have these cultural things in places, which it's a whole other topic, but like how do you keep that going in this new virtual world? Which is why maybe a lot of execs are calling for people to come back to the office. But I think that's so important, right? Is having those cultural things in place, especially around, I know it sounds cliche, but like psychological safety, like having developers being able to go and write code and deploy it and test it without having to worry about things breaking or causing problems. Like that's such a huge importance, especially when you're trying to figure out what this new unified experience looks like, because anyone that knows anything about innovation, right? It's like it's not the great idea, right? It's your ability to test thousands of ideas, and so like that, it's speeding up that feedback loop and those iterations and getting really good at them, and at the same time having a product discipline around figuring out, okay, let me make a hypothesis, let me test the bare minimum thing to figure out if it's working or not working or having the impact we want. Like again, table stakes, like you have to be good at those things. And I mean, this, Aaron, like you work in this every day, like it's part, it's what you do. But for those online, like if people are sort of like, oh, I need to figure out like AI and stuff, like I hate saying it in retrospect, but it's like, don't put the cart before the horse. Like you have to be good at all these other things first. I truly do believe that. But.
Aaron, let me chime in on this. Your question is sort of how do you know that you're building the right thing for a customer? I think is what I took away. And I would offer a couple of suggestions. One is there is more data. And, we talked about the challenges of getting master data management and, kind of getting, a holistic view of what your customer is or who your customer is and what their desires are. But, harvesting data, and certainly, to the extent that you've got online stuff, you can learn a lot about customers because that's inherently digital and you capture that data. So one, you can use analysis and you can use, these new ML kinds of things, this generative AI, to really get a richer sense of that. So that gives you a sense of, gosh, we get a lot of customers on Tuesdays between 5 and 7. Why is that? I don't know. But, you might go, okay, let's understand these kinds of things or whatever it might be. But then the second piece is really about, okay, so you now know kind of about what your customer's behavior is. And then you sort of want to say, how can we best serve that? And to me, that goes out of the realm, or I should say, in addition to kind of raw functionality, we write some code that, you can press this button or whatever it might be. That enters the realm of design thinking. And I think that's part of our whole lab's discipline is, you have user experience, what the user, what the customer, the way they think about solving the problem, what they want and so forth. And you use that as an input into what should we build to respond to that data that we've captured. So learn about what people want and then figure out a way to develop that and incorporate user feedback into that, which is sort of design thinking. And commonly design thinking uses a sort of an MVP, learn and iterate kind of approach, which is very much in line with what Tony was talking about. But that's what I would say. Learn from the data that you're capturing and then validate through user experience, design thinking, iterative kinds of things. And that's important because I'm sure all of us have experienced kind of you go to some kind of place, a retailer quite frequently, and they've just got some odd thing that they're now offering and trying to push on you that you kind of go, I'm not, that would be like any of the three panelists here walking into a drugstore and somebody going, let me give you a beauty product. Probably not the kind of thing that our demographic is looking for. But that would come from somebody, kind of that kind of mismatch of user desires and offers. So user design thinking and, feedback around that.
Great. Yeah, I think there's an interesting thing too, where I think Tony, you said this earlier, values outlast any leader. And we're also talking about this thing called customer centricity, right? And I think that customer centricity doesn't stop at the people paying your bills. It's also about the people who you're hiring and the combination of the skills that you're bringing in-house to deliver those world-class things every single day. And one thing that I'm curious about and that we're still figuring out, what opportunities do you all see in the software delivery lifecycle from end to end for AI and ML to help speed up that end-to-end process? And where specifically in retail might that apply?
Well, that's a great question because there are many perspectives where you can approach from purely from the software development life cycle. I mean, we've seen past 6 months tremendous growth in this coding assistance. So large language models being used to help developers, right, in their daily work. So instead of building everything from scratch, that can use those assistants. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? So nowadays, large language models or Gen AI is also being used for testing, for infrastructure support, so you can quickly. I mean, they don't do anything that a human being cannot do, but they can quickly do all those repetitive tasks for root cause analysis, for example. They can help infrastructure managers to do that. So this whole industry around application development and infrastructure management is booming. VMware is one leader in this segment with lots of new innovations in that space. So that's one thing. The other aspect of this, which is particular to retail, wow, there's again customer intent, capturing customer intent. So dynamic pricing. If I know online or brick and mortar experiences can adjust my pricing based on different factors such as how many people I have in the store, I've been tracking them online, what they're looking for. So it takes us to location-based or seasonality discounts at point of sale as well. So this is Christmas season, holiday season. Targeted recommendations more than ever. People, I mean, I believe that in that specific area, and the guys here, the team, we're flooded these days by information, right? When we browse the internet for one specific product, it doesn't matter what kind of search engine that we use, we get up to thousands or hundreds of thousands of alternatives, and we don't have time to go through each one of them or compare them. We want recommendations that really go straight to maximum three, the trade-offs, and let you decide. And hopefully number one will have an 90% of probability of success, right? So recommendation these days is not about listing 10 similar products or what the most recent similar products, what the consumers they chose. So it's really a smart, intelligent recommendation, personalized recommendation. So I mean, so there's a whole plethora. So marketing, so trade marketing. How can you adjust, for example, the messaging in your store, dynamically, so that you can get people's attention to that. You can also monitor traffic, how many people, customers you have in your store, which areas they are, why are you spending so much time in a section, in a sector that's not selling too much, but usually a lot of people. Is there an opportunity there? Is there a problem there? There's a lot of opportunities. But as you go through each one of them and you try to estimate return over investment or the benefits and the feasibility as well, which is critical, it takes you back necessarily to those very basic questions. Do I have the technology? Do I have the culture, the processes that will allow me to test these opportunities? Do I have the right technology? Can I quickly deploy applications or new features to test all of these use cases that I've just mentioned? I am really connecting my technology people organization with the frontline, workers. The frontline workers, what I'm offering them, right? Also to keep connected with the customers that they have on site eventually. So all of these questions and opportunities are great, but as you go through feasibility and value or potential impact analysis, it takes you back to, can you do it? Really do it? I mean, there's one myth associated with Gen AI or AI these days that I would like to bring to this conversation, which is that only the high-tech companies can afford to use these technologies, which is not true. Obviously, it's very expensive to create a new foundational model, to train a new model, right? But these days you can get this as an API as a service from all of the cloud hyperscalers and the cloud providers, right? So that kind of technology is accessible to organizations from, different sizes with different cycles. But using those capabilities, right? Embed them, infuse them into your processes, your technology, so that you can enable those very interesting use cases, or at least test them, requires those foundational capabilities. Again, people, organization, processes, culture, so that you can quickly test these hypotheses.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been also just fascinating for me to listen in and hear y'all's perspective on this. One more kind of big question. We're talking a lot about opportunity. We're like looking into the future and talking about where some of these things can take us and what it means for end customers like all of us. What I'm curious about is what are some of the downsides? Looking forward, what are some of the risks that you all see about this evolution in tech and this strange but wonderful position that we find ourselves in today?
I mean, I can go first. I mean, I think one of the big ones that I hear talking to my customer, and in fact, it's one of the reasons it can be difficult to get customers sort of on the record or talking about these things. But I think one of them that is a really big open item right now is sort of data governance, right? Around AI. And what I mean by that is, I mean, we're all aware of sort of, access privileges and sort of like, but if you imagine you have some sort of API or system or service that's looking at large quantities of data, even if you have the best data governance around ingress of data into this compute model, it can be very difficult to say, like, to take an answer that something generative may present, for example, from a query, and then determine, like, okay, does the person asking this question, should they have access to this thing I just generated? Right. So when we talk about data governance and AI and generative AI, like, I do think that is a challenge and a risk. Is like, how do you control who has access to what answers of generative AI when that answer can be based on millions of data points, for example, and then you have to track all those data points and see, does this person have access? So that, I think that's what I hear, is that when you hear about data governance and AI, like, I think a lot of companies haven't figured that out yet. And so I think that's one of the reasons it's difficult, at least in my experience. Maybe my customers are telling me to kick rocks. They don't want to do stuff. But I think that's one of the things I'm hearing a lot is, like, we don't want to talk too much about this because we haven't figured all these things out, and data governance comes up all the time with them.
Yeah, if I could.
You're on mute. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, no, I was just going to tee it up for them to pitch in. So Sergio, please continue.
Yeah, no, well, just saying Tony's right. So that's, again, master data and data governance are critical. One of those core foundations or core capabilities. And particular to Gen AI, what do you find in general? There are three big areas of concerns or risks, right? As organizations, retail organizations, they explore opportunities in that technology. The first is around privacy. Nowadays, there are solutions that help companies to have their private AI, their private models, like private infrastructure and models, so they can deploy them safely. But even though privacy, you don't share consumers or customers' information, so that's the protection in terms of the privacy. But there are risks; they are well known, and some of them are already in the news. Bias is the second big risk or concern. As you implement, for example, customer service, you enhance customer service capabilities with Gen AI, right? So these large language models are really conversational. They have really actual conversational capabilities. Chat GPT became a general purpose technology because of that, because of the chat. GPT has been there for years, but the chat GPT with reinforcement learning with the human in the loop, that's new, right? Which has been proven. But as you implement those capabilities, how do you be sure that that automated smart service is not biased, right? Biased, many terms, right? Not only language, the terms, but are they treating customers differently because the data that was used to train them or create them or fine tune them is skewed or biased. So bias is the second. And the third is intellectual property, right? As if you leverage those foundationals or large language models that were pre-trained by these large high-tech companies, how do you be sure that you're protected and your customers are also protected, that you're not reusing, inadvertently using intellectual property? And how do you protect your own intellectual property? So in simple terms, there are those three areas are areas that I've seen customers and the whole industry is concerned as they go through that, right? To evaluating and explore Gen AI use cases.
So we got some data governance challenges, privacy, bias. How about you, Bernard? Anything else that is concerning you or that you're seeing themes of?
Well, I'd like to sort of step back and sort of in a way circle back to where I started, because I said, what's going on for retail is kind of this, its time has come. Its time in the spotlight has come with this whole change in digitization and the changing expectations of customers. And we talked about sort of the unified customer experience. And we've been talking a lot about what does that require? But circling back to the kind of the overall, trends that were in a sense accelerated by COVID, because all of a sudden everybody was an online customer. People who might in the past gone, yeah, I could do it online, but I'll drive down. They couldn't do that anymore. So it accelerated this overarching, but overall there's an overarching move. And I think, let me use an analogy. Just as, 40 years ago or 30 years ago, or whatever it was, when Walmart said, we're going to transform the supply chain and use that to reduce our cost structure. And that meant every retailer had to figure out, how do I respond to that? I've got to have a strategy that either mimics that or doesn't rely on that, because what I've done in the past with mine isn't sufficient in this new world. So the digitization is an overarching thing that's going on at the customer side, not an internal side. But every retailer has to say, how do I respond to that? How do I figure that out? We've been talking about details, but the overarching thing is I've got to build a strategy around that. And I think one of the challenges that I think this is fundamental, and this is really at the board of directors, CEO, C-level, is this is now the new table stakes. Just like figuring out your supply chain was the table stakes at that time, now this kind of embedded digitization, this kind of unified customer, this kind of tech capability. And typically that requires more investment into tech. And retail has traditionally been an environment where it's been a low investment into tech. Of all industries, it typically had a smaller percentage of overall revenues devoted to technology. And that's gonna have to increase in this world. And so every retailer has to go, okay, that's the new reality. I've got to figure out a way to do that. I've got to, increase my funding and figure out a way to protect that budget. Because it can't be like, well, when times are good, yeah, we're going to spend money on, oh, wait a second, times are bad, everything gets cut back and so forth. So I think that's an overarching strategic challenge that is required to be in place, strategic challenge or strategic commitment for all of these kinds of things, that all these great ideas we've come up with about the how to really take place. That's kind of how I would sort of, as I said, circle back and kind of summarize this.
Yeah, again, Bernard always says like the best things that spark idea, like little recollections for me. I would say, again, tell me but for the folks that I'm talking to, what I'm seeing as one of the big challenges, I mean, when you talk about cost, I think I see a lot of retailers that have these big sort of autonomous business units, which is good for a lot of reasons, right? But then when you talk about cost, economies of scale and so forth. But there's also all this duplicative effort between these business units for things that I think, some companies are doing as shared services, right? So I think finding the right balance of the things that that as a shared IT or shared services group, where you can say, hey, like, we have 14 different business units all duplicating this work. Like, we could do this portion of this for you. But I think there's some work to be done around business units trusting their centralized IT or shared services groups to do that in a way that doesn't create friction or delays. But again, like, I think it's really necessary, though. I mean, I had a mentor one time tell me, like, sometimes a suboptimal strategy is better than like a lack of a strat. Like, having a suboptimal strategy that everyone's agreeing to is better than sort of everyone having what they think is their best strategy, right? And so I think, going back to the other thing that Bernard was talking about, I think there is an opportunity for IT groups to get it right around, let us take some of the burdens from each of you, reduce costs, right? So that as a company, we can, whether that's tool sprawl, I see that all the time. Like, that's a topic that comes up all the time. Every business unit has like their own little stack and their preferred cloud provider and all of this stuff. But finding an opportunity to create macros of scale across business units, which is difficult because we're not incentivized to do that, so that as a company you can invest, you have funds to invest when you didn't previously. I think that's really important. And it's a hard thing to do, but I keep seeing companies kind of kicking that can down the road or saying it's not possible. And I think that is a really big challenge, obviously, when you're strapped for budget for investments.
Yeah, this goes deep in my heart, because in my old days as CIO and IT leader, whenever there was engaging the business, the CEO or middle management, whoever the organization, about strategy and execution, right? I remember, and I think it is still prevalent in the industry today, two kinds of conversations. One is alignment between IT and the business, right? And the other one is your IT organization a cost center or a profit center, right? So about the first one, and that's very personal, but I've been repeating this conversation in different situations with different customers. If when you get into discussions like IT aligned with the business, you're in the wrong place, because you're starting from the position where IT is not business, and your business is not about technology. So IT is the business and business is technology. So that's a useless conversation. If you're talking about that, it's because there are, significant problems, other problems to be addressed, not exactly alignment. The second one about cost center or profit center. IT is business. IT has a P&L, right? And I've seen, and I've been through this in my life. Managing IT is just in the L side of the equation. Try to optimize your costs. How far can you go down that road? That's a relentless battle. Control your costs, know your costs. You be sure that they're visible, that you are exposing them. Exploring alternatives with the technology, with your suppliers, and the technology, also with the business, the demand side. But that's a useless also a process, because you would not get anywhere managing or approaching technology purely from a cost perspective. Which takes me to your point, Tony and Bernard as well. When you start envisioning your technology as a profit center and you explore this revenue growth, productivity gains opportunities as a profit center, and you start testing these hypotheses with the business, not by yourself, but with the business, and you learn and you reallocate funding to other initiatives, that's when this virtual cycle of growth, of learning happens, right? So I'm very passionate about this, because those are strategy, execution, retail, technology is too expensive. How can we optimize costs? But we don't have money to invest. And that's sort of a chicken and the egg conversation. You keep going and going and going, and you do not get anywhere. So get out of those two conversations, right? It's not about alignment between IT and the business. In IT's business, there's a P&L. Don't spend too much time on the L side. You got to be there, because if you don't do it, you're going to ruin the business because the cost might explode. But focus on the P side of the equation as well.
Thanks so much. We've got just under 5 minutes left. For those of you on the line, thank you again so much. I hope this has lived up to the promise of being both candid, informative, and hopefully pretty spirited conversation about this space. Team, any closing remarks before we open up for probably 1 to 2 questions?
I think Sergio just validated the reason why companies keep hiring execs every 3 years, right? They kind of come in, they got a big plan, we get some ROI model, right? That never gets realized, and so it's the way we justify investment, maybe. But I joke. But yeah, Bernard, do you have any sort of closing thoughts you want to touch on, or?
Well, Aaron, I do have some, but I'd like to, if we have questions pending, I think it'd be very interesting to deal with the questions.
Yeah.
I don't want to forestall Tony and Sergio's perspective, but it's always, I always find when I present, I always like to get interactive questions. So rather than me, putting out punditry, big thoughts, love to hear if there's any questions that we could address.
Great. For those of you in the audience, do we have any questions for these folks?
I'm clicking on the section that says questions, and I don't see any. So.
Okay, well, Aaron, stick up a hand if one, is there, but in favor of that, or in alternative to that, I think big thoughts. I mean, really, I think this is such an interesting, exciting time for technology people, for people who work in tech. And I think, as I said, this isn't, but as Sergio said, this is not a technology question. This is a business question. Because I was getting at that with the kind of, this is, the fundamental change in the market, and you've got to figure out a way to react. I think that it's incumbent on technologists to really communicate the change that's going on in the tech industry, and to communicate that as a, sort of, this is the new benchmark. This is the new thing we're going to have to meet and get that. And I think that's probably a key part of what's going on now, and a key part of, moving from, I had a friend once who did strategy consulting to retailers, and he worked at a very large pharmaceutical company, like a pharmacy company, where you go and get prescriptions filled, that kind of thing. And I asked him, how come tech isn't more important? And he said, the reason we hate tech, you just spout incomprehensible jargon and ask for huge amounts of money. It was like, so we just hate talking to you. But I think to break out of that, you've got to sort of bring forward, this is the new benchmark. This is the new reality. There was a lot when cloud computing first started to appear. It was a lot like, look at what this company's done. And that's why, my former employer, Capital One, that's kind of a poster child, because it was, when people go, well, you can't run a financial institution on it. It's like, well, actually, and all of a sudden it was like that took it from the realm of hypothetical to here's the new benchmark. And so I think it's really incumbent on technology people within retail to kind of say, sort of ventilate that knowledge into their organizations to say, this is the new benchmark. This is what we're going to be competing with. This is, and these are the factors, the characteristics, the capabilities that are part of it, so that, people can't go, oh, it's just a flash in the pan, or, stop talking all that stuff that puts bees in my head, kind of thing. So I think that's a really key kind of thing, because honestly, my eyes have been opened around this generative AI and what it brings to the table. And it's not a dabbling kind of a thing. So that's just one example of this technology. And again, underlying it is, you got to have agile development process and all the technology we've been talking about. So that's what I would say in terms of big thoughts, rather in favor of no questions.
Fabulous. Well, thank you three so much. It has been wonderful to be here with you. And for those who are on the line, thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time. If you have any further questions about what we talked about today, or you're interested in taking what we talked about and making it into reality in your organization, please drop us a line. We are here and we're eager to help and have a follow-up conversation. So thanks again. I hope you all have a wonderful Thursday.
Thanks, Aaron.
Bye.
Thanks,
Aaron.
guys.